We're in the information age, but facts are in short supply. Reject the noise, ask bold questions, and seek the truth. With FBI whistleblower and common sense extremist, Steve Friend. This is the American Radicals Podcast.
It is the American Radicals Podcast, and it's Monday, March 9th, 2026. Welcome to it. Today, we're going to be talking about the government getting involved in childcare and the price of beef. Los Angeles superintendent is in trouble despite his charm and really nice, snazzy dressing style. There are more revelations about the Epstein suicide. We got a latest update on an FBI entrapment classic, and police shot a man with a knife. And that's a problem for the communist media. Let's get after it. Having a complete picture, all of the puzzle pieces put together. That's really the goal of any sort of law enforcement investigation. If you're doing your job and you're focusing in on the process, not the outcome, that doesn't matter. Victory is in the process. You gather the facts and you present them. If the facts support a conviction, that's because the facts did. If the facts don't support a conviction, that's because the facts did. It has nothing to do with you focusing in on the process. Now, this process is like you've seen any other law enforcement police procedural. You're putting the puzzle pieces together. You cannot assume facts that are not in evidence, and that's a rule in court. You cannot presume to know what you don't actually know. That's not fair, which always was a problem for me a few years back when we had the whole #MeToo, the believe all women narrative that went out. Why? Why would I believe somebody just because of an immutable characteristic, what they got dangling between their legs, what their DNA profile is? No, I need to see facts and evidence to support any sort of charge. So if you're doing an investigation and you get one side of things, that's only one side. That's only a couple of puzzle pieces. If you start to just mentally fill in those pieces without actually gathering the facts, then you could be swayed one way or another. You don't have a complete picture. That's where the emotion comes into it. And that's something that our elected officials like to rely on. That's something that our communist media like to rely on, to paint things in one way so that your emotions take over. And rather than analyzing what the actual evidence is in hand, what you have in evidence, you fill in the gaps and you think, oh, well, that sounds reasonable. I feel bad for that, so I want to rectify the problem. If I'm sitting across the table interviewing an alleged victim of, let's say, an assault, and she starts crying, well, she's presenting her recollections, and she might be honest with me. She might be deceptive with me. She might be in a good faith effort trying to tell me everything that happened, and it might be truly awful. But everything she tells me is through her own lens. Unless I were to have some sort of omnipotent view of what happened, I will never know every single puzzle piece, but my goal is to get as many puzzle pieces as I can to get the most complete picture that I can so I can find out what happened there. And if I don't do that, I allow the emotionality to consume me. Then I just say, hey, I'm going to be the hammer of justice and just point me in the direction of the person you want me to go after. That's not your job. And that's not our job here on the American Radicals Podcast. So I've got some stories today. We're going to go into them and look at them through the goal being we want to gather as much facts as we can. We'll not let the emotionality behind it, not let the politics of it get behind it. Let's just look at it empirically and objectively. And let's begin with the government wanting to get involved in beef prices in probably one of the most dumb ways possible. So, first story of the day comes from the Washington Post. It's an opinion piece, but democracy dies in darkness. Headline, the dumbest way to lower beef prices. So Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer introduced a bill last week aimed at forcing meat packers to process only one type of meat. So that would mean like Tyson. They would only be able to process chicken or beef, whatever they wanted to process. They could only use one animal. That would be like saying, Ford, you can only make F-150s. No more Explorers or Mustangs. Those are different types of vehicles. You can only make pickup trucks. Now, behind this is the idea, I guess it's a very like trust busting Teddy Roosevelt perspective because it sounds good. We're going to break up those big companies, those evil price gouging companies. But that's just not true. So these big companies like the Tyson Foods or the Cargills of the world, they are actually big because they have best practices and they're really actually effective at processing the different sorts of meat, pork, beef, poultry. But how are they going to achieve this if this is a government action? Well, it has emotionality to it. We're going to break up those big, horrible businesses, even though those big companies sell at the most competitive prices right now. I understand the frustration that people feel when they go to the grocery store. I too look for the yellow tag beef, but the best prices are actually coming from the big farm and big ag, big meat, whatever the industry is. They're actually coming in at the lowest overall price. They have the best practices, they have the infrastructure. Now, how would this be achieved from Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer? Well, they want to first force the Tyson or the Cargill, pick a lane, bro. And once you have that, that creates a giant gap in the industry. Who's going to fill that void? Nature abhors a vacuum. Somebody's going to have to step to it, but it's very expensive. I mean, if you remove Tyson from poultry production because they choose another lane, that's a massive gap. How could they possibly fill that quickly? It'd be very expensive, very time consuming. Well, when you work for the government, you look at the government as always the solution. So back to the piece again from the Washington Post. Government subsidies, including financial assistance and loan guarantees to help small businesses acquire and operate meat packing plants. So, if Tyson were to abandon the chicken plant, then Steve's Chicken would be able to get a government loan in order to acquire that infrastructure so that I could fill the gap. And how would I do it? The financial assistance, it would come from the government, which would mean that the government would steal money, tax it from you, or just print it out of thin air, causing inflation, meaning that the dollars in your bank account become worth less today than they were yesterday, or they get a loan, right? Or they borrow the money from a foreign actor, or they put out some bonds in order to do it. So they're borrowing money from your children that your children will have to actually pay back. And then that money will be infused into the economy, which will cause prices to go up due to inflation, more dollars chasing fewer goods, so that Steve's Chicken could take over for Tyson and hopefully come in with a price that competes with what Tyson was already doing, which was the lowest on the market. So we're going to spend more money to save money. It's very much like we're going to suspend the free market to save the free market. And also, we want to prop up our buddies, right? Like, who's going to be on the receiving end of those financial tools and instruments? Well, it's going to be people that maybe make a contribution to Chucky Schumer's coffers, right? In fact, just theoretically, we're taking money from some to give it to others. So, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. And on top of that, then there will be picking winners and losers. And then there will be a relationship between the federal government shelling out financial resources to private entities. So there will be a relationship there that borders on fascism. So we're back to socialism plus fascism. It's the worst combination of all. But it sounds good, right? We're going to break up the big business. We're going to help the little guy. It's going to sound amazing. They're just hoping you don't realize that the prices will skyrocket as a result, and you will just rue the day that we do not have yellow tag beef anymore. Now, that's Chuck Schumer, right? He's at the political left. But, we're mega, MAGA, Doppler awesome now, right? We're back. We're based. America is there, except the current president, who's mean, orange, and literally Hitler, according to the Washington Post, because democracy dies in darkness. Second headline: Trump tries Biden's inflation playbook. So we're going to cause inflation the same way that your predecessor did, but it'll be better because it's MAGA. So from this piece, it's a retrospective. The Biden administration contributed to inflation with regulations and economic stimulus. Yes, stimulus, just printing a whole butt ton of money and putting it into the system, causing inflation to get to like 9%. So Biden called out meat packers and grocery stores. They were price gouging, remember? Kamala Harris ran on that. She was going to try to put some sort of federal ban on price gouging. I don't think that we've ever had a serious presidential contender recommend that, let alone somebody from one of the two major parties. But to the photo there, if you see, of President Trump, I think that's the Prime Minister of Poland. I don't know. I don't pay attention to foreign politics with him, but it's the same story for Donald Trump. So we've got tariffs currently in place. They're raising the prices on imported goods, and he's trying to take control of the Federal Reserve while demanding interest rate cuts. So aside from the price of beef, what they're pointing to here, there's an economic consequence of tariffs, which Donald Trump is a protectionist. He believes in tariffs. He's fighting it out in the courts to see what his level of control he actually can have over those are. But the theory behind tariffs are we will charge a premium to bring in goods to our country if they come from a foreign country, so that we can incentivize Americans to buy American goods, because those foreign goods become more pricey, more expensive. So you're saying, all right, I'm going to buy American, even if the American good is maybe the same price, maybe a little bit more. I'm patriotic. I want to support American business. Maybe even the American good is less pricey. But at the same time, it's the government in the way, creating this arbitrary price hike of foreign goods, inserting itself into the free exchange of money for goods and services. The government just always loves to get involved. And then secondly, you have the Federal Reserve. We talk about inflation, injecting a whole bunch of money into the system. Well, Donald Trump wants the interest rates to be kept low. When interest rates are low, that makes it more enticing to go and get a loan. It makes the price of borrowing money less. So people go get a mortgage, or they'll go get a small business loan. And then when that money is loaned to them, it gets immediately injected into the economy, causing the prices to go up again. So we're not really pursuing the best measures to bring in deflation, let alone like some sort of a level of inflation that's deemed to be acceptable, which is just patently absurd at this point. I mean, your government right now says our goal is to have your dollars become worth less by 2% every year. We see that as success. I don't see it that way. And I don't think people who are lining up to buy yellow tag beef, or hoping to maybe have yellow tag beef to buy if Chuck Schumer's bill gets passed through, I don't think that they would agree with that. Now, that's food, putting some food on the table for your family. What about childcare, which is another significant expense that most Americans are out there facing, because we exist in latter days now where we have two income households, unlike they were, say, 50, 60 years ago, which we'll get into in a second here. So this comes from the New York Times. It's a story about childcare. Headline reads, "Why does childcare seem less affordable than ever?" And I really appreciate the childcare worker there with the purple hair. So whatever a communist witch that is, and whoever parents sent their children there, shame on them. So from this piece, families earning the median income spend far more than the 7% of household income that the Department of Health and Human Services considers affordable. All right, before I move on there, that needs to be restated. The Department of Health and Human Services, which is a department in the executive branch of your government, even though it's not mentioned in our pesky, dusty documents, the Department of Health and Human Services, they deem, government bureaucrats, that you should be on the hook or expect to spend 7% of your income or less to send your kids to be raised by somebody else. That's deemed to be affordable in the eyes of a government bureaucrat. Facts and evidence? Do we have anything on that other than, I got a feeling, and 7 kind of sounds like a lucky number? Is anybody going to scrutinize that figure? Where did you come up with that? Why would the federal government be in the business of deciding what is and isn't affordable for most American households? Why would the government be in the business of childcare to begin with? Which I kind of wanted to get to with this piece because they're really concerned about childcare expenses going up and how that could be. And there's multiple factors that are in there. It's the New York Times, so they always go back to coronavirus, which did actually cause childcare expenses to go up. At first, I was kind of like, well, that doesn't make sense. I mean, everybody had to stay home, right? The kids stayed home. Why would childcare expenses go up? Well, because there were all these regulations placed on the daycare clinics and the day schools that they had to keep the place clean, bring in all the sanitation stuff, and that's very expensive. They had to bring in new HVAC systems, all that, again, very expensive. And on top of that, it is a very labor driven industry. You can't automate childcare workers yet. We don't have Rosie the robot from the Jetsons able to provide care for the kids yet. So they're really hammering home on this piece here from the New York Times that you just have to pay the workers. And because of inflation, you're having to pay the workers more because of the new regulations from coronavirus. You're having to put out more money. So the margins are just so slim here. And all that's contributing to childcare going up. And it's over the 7% that Department of Health and Human Services says is acceptable. And then also, federal government handed out a whole bunch of subsidies during coronavirus. Those expired. And then states kind of stepped in. They said, well, the daycare centers, they're really addicted to that infusion of cash from the federal government. So we're going to fill the gap right now and give them some more subsidies. And now those are kind of drying up. And again, the federal government printed, borrowed, or stole, taxed money from you, causing you to become poorer, or just inflated the money to, again, make you poorer to hand more money off to childcare because those businesses had to stay afloat, because people had to go back to work. Why would you have to go back to work? Oh, because the money in your bank account is not worth what it was yesterday. It's a dog chasing its tail. It's an entire system where nobody is putting the puzzle pieces together and realizing that infusion of government cash is actually causing the problem to get worse. And maybe if they just kind of took a step back and looked at that pesky, dusty document where it doesn't say anything about, hey, we should be involved in the price of beef or the price of daycare, then maybe if they backed out of it and weren't taxing money from you or borrowing money on the backs of your children or printing it out of thin air, then perhaps our monetary system would be a little bit more stable and people wouldn't need childcare because June Cleaver could stay home and just allow Ward to go to work. It seemed to work for a really long time. And reference Leave It to Beaver, that was an entire successful television show because it reflected back to the American people what they knew to be true. Life in the burbs, Norman Rockwell style. Dad goes to work, mom stays home, 2.5 kids, white picket fence. It's all awesome. So again, I wanted to get a complete picture, the puzzle pieces. How long has our government been involved in something like childcare? Don't think George Washington stood that up, right? Well, it actually goes back little less than 100 years ago. It started in the Great Depression when we had Franklin Roosevelt, who was probably the closest thing we ever had to a dictator in this country. 4-time elected president, refused to step away. He thought, I'm better than George Washington. I can just keep coming back for more. Died in office. 1933, there was an effort to put out, they called it emergency nursery schools. It achieved 2 things. It allowed for 2-parent household incomes to come back or to actually originate from many families. And on top of that, it was a government work program. So we're going to, again, print money to pay people to watch kids so that parents can go to work, which would necessitate inflation. But it wasn't huge. It went away. And then a decade later, still during the time of FDR, they stood up another effort, and that was for the war, for World War II. And that was an emergency situation. I could see there being a justification. Dad can't go to work, or dad is kind of working, but he's deployed and we're not getting the money sent home. So mom goes to work, or mom just goes to try to save the war effort or help with the war effort. We got the Riveter, right? Rosie Riveter. She would go out there and help make bomb making materials. All hands on deck. So as a result, they stood up some, again, government nursery efforts. And again, was faded away. So when did it become kind of permanent? During the war on poverty. Lyndon Johnson spending billions, trillions of dollars to stop poverty. So we spent money to make people have money, even though by spending the money's not worth that much and would actually have to cause them to go work more because it sounds good, right? Like on its face, like people need money, just print money and give it to them. That'll clearly solve the problem. The people that made that decision out of any sort of emotionality, they didn't have all the puzzle pieces. They didn't think it through. They were economically illiterate, or you could assign something a little bit more nefarious and probably likely. They wanted to addict people to sweet, sweet government welfare, knowing that they would have a permanent voter base and there would be job security for those politicians who said, put me into office and I'll keep Uncle Sam funds flowing. So that takes us forward then into time of my childhood. During the 30s, 40s, it was like a third of the women in our country were in the workforce. The vast majority stayed home, single household income coming in. But by the 1990s, when I was a kid, it was like 6 in 10 women were in the workforce, basically on par with men. We almost doubled our workforce by creating a system that had mom and dad in the workplace. It was so good for GDP. And then we also had to stand up some childcare centers for the kids. So we actually, by sending 3 people to work, we tripled our GDP. It sounded awesome, but the quality of life really didn't change after that. And then we get to more modern day things that we can all remember. And again, during a Republican administration and a Democrat administration, coronavirus, stay home, stay safe, federal subsidies come a-flying from the CARES Act. And then the Biden administration rolled in with the American Rescue Plan, more infusion of government dollars, money that was stolen, I mean taxed from you, or printed out of thin air, or borrowed on the backs of your children and grandchildren in order to stand up childcare, which again, if the government divested itself entirely from, because they took a step back and said, hey, we've been doing this for almost 100 years, and the prices are now going up beyond what our bureaucrats are arbitrarily saying is affordable. It's more than 7%. Maybe we should look at all the puzzle pieces and realize that it's a message back to us that we stink at this and we should just go back to what we were doing before when childcare was affordable because it was just mom and dad looking after Beeve and what's the brother's name? Dang it. I can't remember. Oh, Wally and the Beeve. All right. But let's stay in the kind of the education and childcare because schools like glorified childcare for tweens and teens at this point. So talk about not having a complete picture. I have this piece from the New York Times, and it's about the Los Angeles superintendent who's now been suspended. Headline: Los Angeles schools chief brought swagger, then scandal. There's a little bit of self-awareness in this, so I just wanted to briefly touch on it because it's pretty funny. So this guy, his name is Alberto Carvalho. He was a superintendent in Miami, and he was like MAGA Doppler opposed to Donald Trump and deportations during the first Trump administration. So he was an outspoken advocate for immigrant children and said that removing illegal aliens from classrooms would only happen, quote, over my dead body. So dyed in the wool communist. He was hashtag resisting the first time around during the Trump administration. He winds up moving on out to Los Angeles post coronavirus. He's going to be the savior there that's going to pick up the schools. And he had the swagger. You could see there if you happen to be watching us, I'll put it back up on rumble.com/amradpod, and YouTube @amradpod, or Spotify, which we'll post after the show today around 1 o'clock Eastern. You can see that this Carvalho, he's got that sweet, sweet suit there. He's worth a whole bunch of money. Got that Pat Riley swooshed hair back, looks like a mob boss. He has the whole appearance and swagger, and Los Angeles put all their hope in him. But they might have learned a lesson because some are wondering now if his confidence, charisma, and left leaning politics could have blinded the city to his problems. His problems included he was involved in an extramarital affair with a journalist down in Miami. She was a young lady, and her career was destroyed, and he went on to greener pastures. Didn't really impact him. And then also, he got involved in this artificial intelligence chatbot thing, this tech thing. He's not the chief person, but I guess he's like one of the chief hype men, and he also has access to what they wanted. So this chatbot, I think I have what it was called. All Here, ALLHERE, All Here chatbot. It was the chatbot. They said, "Hey, call me Ed," because it was for education. It was a chatbot for students in school. And wouldn't you know, he's a superintendent of Los Angeles. He's got some really great access to a lot of kids, a lot of schools, and that would be just banger for this startup company, right? So high profile tech conference promising that this Ed, this All Here chatbot, call me Ed, would, quote, democratize education and become a friend to struggling students. And then the company's founder was charged with fraud and misleading investors and saying that they had a finished product, but they really didn't have it, and revenue, they really didn't have it, and they had customers, they really didn't have it. And now the FBI has come to look at Carvalho's home and his place of business. And apparently he's got like 5 or 6 homes in Florida as well. So now he's under the spotlight and scrutiny because he looks like a dirtbag. He probably is something similar to one of these mobbed up characters that he endeavors to look like. But back to some self-awareness. Maybe you should have put the whole puzzle piece together, right? I mean, the extramarital thing alone, I mean, people make mistakes. I understand it. Was there a lesson learned? The extramarital affair came to public awareness in 2008. You hired him in 2021. And maybe you just were blinded by his politics and how he was going to hashtag resist the president who was mean, orange, and literally Hitler. And now you might have put the superintendent in charge of all of Los Angeles public schools is some sort of a scam artist. All right, let's do some law enforcement stuff. So there was some revelations, and again, we don't have a complete puzzle piece assembled right now on Epstein. Epstein with the list and the documents, but what about just his death and his suicide? I mean, I know that former co-deputy director of the FBI, Dan Bongino, did his hostage video when he sighed and looked down and did the whole Joe Biden, I'm going to talk at a low voice. I've seen the file. He killed himself. And nobody believes that to be true. No objective person says, because we don't have all of the evidence presented to us. This is a closed case. I don't know why we haven't had it, right? And we were promised transparency by the current administration, and yet hasn't been turned over. But we did get a little nugget of truth, and it was about the prison guard, or one of the prison guards. So this woman, her name is Tova Noel. She was criminally charged, and then charges got dropped on her. Apparently, there was a little bit further investigation into her involvement or what her actions were the night that Jeffrey Epstein committed suicide. So it looks like that night, not only did she not do her rounds like she was supposed to, not only did she fall asleep like she's not supposed to, apparently, Miss Noel, she was shopping for furniture online and also looking up Jeffrey Epstein that evening, and put a $5,000 deposit into her bank account 10 days before his suicide. She actually had a significant number of deposits into her bank account. No rationale for it. I mean, she gets a paycheck from the prison system, so it wasn't tied to anything that she was doing as far as her profession goes. So there were some unusual deposits to her bank, and there hasn't been any answers to how that could have been. And that creates a lot of smoke here, right? It was determined that this woman, Tova Noel, was likely the orange blob that was moving in that really grainy footage where there shouldn't have been anybody walking up to the SHU, the segregated housing unit. And it's believed now by the Department of Justice that that was actually her walking up those stairs. And who knows what she was doing? Was she bringing an extra prison jumpsuit to Jeffrey Epstein? She hasn't been forthcoming, but now there's a lot of smoke around this woman. She also, the New York. This is a story I got from the New York Post, and it's a really awful website with tons of pop-ups. But I did find this funny. She drove a $62,000 Land Rover Range Rover to her interview with the Department of Justice, and she doesn't earn that much money. So again, where did that vehicle come from? Okay, that's one law enforcement thing. Let's go to the other one that I want to kind of hone in on today, because we've continued to hammer this story and we now have sort of a resolution to it. And it's a story of a thief merchant, probably Mount Rushmore of FBI entrapments. The playbook, if you happen to be new to the American Radicals podcast, welcome. Make sure you give us a thumbs up, follow, subscribe. The playbook that the FBI loves to run on its counterterrorism cases, in excess of 90% of them, because 90+% of FBI counterterrorism cases involve someone who is not predisposed or capable of actually bringing forward a successful terrorist attack. They find a vulnerable person. They groom that person with confidential human sources, a snitch. Eventually, they introduce an undercover, and then they spring the mousetrap and they say, aha, we got a terrorist. Cliff notes. A thief merchant, he he hasn't got a death penalty, but he just did get convicted in a court of law. So I can throw up the update from the New York Times, at one point a newspaper. Headline: Pakistani man is found guilty of plot to kill Trump, backed by Iran. A thief merchant, Pakistani, came via Iran to the United States, flew to Texas because the FBI endorsed his travel, sponsored his arrival, said that he was a key person who we had to have. Not to arrest him when he got off the plane, but to actually then allow him to travel within the interior of the country, go to New York City, and work on his plot. And his plot was to recruit dozens of fake protesters to go outside politicians' homes. We don't know the politicians. It wasn't at least listed in the charging documents. Maybe some more was presented during his trial or during discovery. But he was going to have fake protests to distract the politicians, while a female infiltrated those politicians' homes and stole various classified material that a thief merchant assumed they had laying around their house, because he thinks everybody is Joe Biden. And then he was also going to recruit hitmen at New York City nightclubs to go and kill an array of US politicians. I believe at his trial, he winds up listing Donald Trump and Nikki Haley and Joe Biden. Who knows? And I say he listed it off. It's because his attorneys let him testify at his own trial. So now I've got questions about the legitimacy of his attorneys, if there was some sort of deal struck between the Department of Justice and defense attorneys, because that's a retarded legal play. But maybe he was insistent, and he is, after all, the client. But to wrap up his plot, he was going to get the classified material stolen. He was going to get those assassination plots done, all for $5,000, which he didn't have, and his cousin was going to have to loan him the money because he's a vulnerable person, low intelligence. How vulnerable and how long was he on the radar? Well, that actually did get fleshed out. The second part is, we have part one, we have a vulnerable person. Part two, we introduce the confidential human source. A lot of times it's kind of happening at the same time. The confidential human source is hunting for a vulnerable person. But second part, confidential human source. We don't know this individual's name. He testified under a fake name to protect his identity, but it came out that he knew a thief merchant since 2017, when he was a linguist for the US military. So it's likely that he was grooming a thief merchant for 7 years, or at least was aware of his proclivities and vulnerabilities. And then when he wanted to go and earn a quick buck from the United States government, he said, hey, I got this guy who thinks I'm his buddy. I bet I can get him to agree to go do a terrorism. Would that be worth it to you? And the FBI said, yeah, here's $20,000, which they paid this individual. Right. So from the New York Times, we found out he's now been convicted in a court of law. He is a convicted terrorist or would-be assassin. So the evidence that was presented, here's a key point. He never came close to pulling off his schemes, and he claimed that he knew the plan would not work when he arrived to Texas in April of 2024, and yet he proceeded nonetheless. So he knew it wasn't going to work and still went forward. He's kind of retarded. Mr. Merchant was released after arriving to the airport and being scrutinized, which led him to questioning whether or not he'd be able to pull off this whole plot. The plot was foiled by a Pakistani American acquaintance who became an FBI informant, secretly recorded their conversations. So Asif Merchant going to the pokey, probably for life. This is one of the would-be assassins that was presented to Donald Trump, one of the driving factors behind his decision to go and engage with Iran, and not a war, but I don't know, like some overseas kinetic action, whatever they're calling it. Don't you dare call me a stewardess. I'm a flight progress coordinator. One more law enforcement story that I want to get to, and talking about not having the puzzle pieces. And I said that leadership within our government does it, and the media does it as well. And this is a complete play for emotionality. And this is also reflective of people not having a fundamental understanding of what a use of force continuum is in law enforcement. And we can kind of educate you here on that. So the story headline reads, an autistic man called police for a wellness check. He was fatally shot. I guess they're hoping you don't read the piece. But if you do, you will still be very, very poorly educated about what the expectation is from our media. So let me throw it back up there. You can see a picture of the would-be victim there. His name is Alexis Lamori, or I'm not Alexis, Alex Lamori, 25. He was an autistic man, no longer with us. So during the incident in question, he called his mother, told her he was in a suicidal crisis, and he had called the police for a wellness check. That was actually part of his safety plan that they had put into place. So he seems to be kind of more high functioning than others, because the Washington Post goes into this whole thing that he was they call him a generous voice, that he was an advocate. He was on a board of some organization. He would go and talk to podcasts about what it was like to have autism. But anyway, this guy, Alex, calls the police saying, I've got some suicidal thoughts. I need you to come check on me. The mom winds up calling suicide hotline. They patch her through to the sheriff's office. She goes, he's autistic, just so you know. Police arrive there. They find him outside of this special apartment complex that was for people of his disability. And he had a knife, and 3 officers were there. 2 of them trained in specialty negotiation with mentally impaired people, crisis negotiators, more or less. And he refused to put the knife down, and he kept coming towards them. So all 3 officers wind up shooting and killing Alex. So back to a generous voice. So in addition to talking on podcasts and doing presentations and interviews, he, quote, like to write action and horror stories inspired by Iron Man and Captain America. Okay. I'm not minimizing that this is a tragic incident, but he liked to write, so he has the right to walk up to a bunch of cops with a knife in his hand. Lamori, Alex, earned an associate's degree, and he also wanted to pursue a bachelor's degree. Well, he just wanted to get a further education. So that entitles him to walk up with an edged weapon on law enforcement, right? Then there was a call for help. Maryland embraced more training for officers and had to deal with people for disabilities. That's what this winds up happening. Officers, though, according to the Washington Post, tend to get more training on use of tactical skills, which can lead to responding with lethal force during a crisis rather than verbal de-escalation skills. Because what they should have done is use gerbil voodoo. That's what we call it. Not verbal judo, gerbil voodoo, where you're taught to say, sir, is there anything that I can say right now to get you to put down the knife? Because apparently the people who write for the Washington Post are ignorant to what it's like to be a cop. Now, you sign up for the cop, you sign up for the job, and this is a tragic part of it. It's unavoidable for some. These 3 officers were dispatched. They didn't go to work that day saying, you know what I want to do? Smoke an autistic 25-year-old. That would just be the cherry on top of my career. It would be awesome. No, they went to work They were dispatched to a public escort, a welfare check, saying, hey, this guy's calling up. He's saying he's struggling. Can you go and check on him? Maybe he wanted to be checked in for some sort of an evaluation. They arrived. He had an edged weapon. Deadly force. Deadly force is used when a threat of serious bodily injury or death is imminent to you, the officer, or to another person. This guy had an edged weapon and was coming towards the officers. They don't have to be right. They just have to be reasonable. Were they reasonable? I don't know. I wasn't there. I haven't seen the body camera. Were they 600 yards away from him? Doubt it. He was standing outside the building. They probably pulled up and he was within, 10 yards, 15 yards? How quickly can somebody run at you with an edged weapon before you can draw a pistol? There's this whole thing within law enforcement. It's the 21-foot rule. I don't think it's ever been really proven, but it's sort of just thrown out there. 21 feet. The presumption is that anybody, unless they're Joe Biden in a human Roomba, can get 21 feet with an edged weapon and stab you before you can draw your weapon, no matter how awesome you are. Whether or not you're Annie Oakley or Doc Holliday, it doesn't matter. 21 feet, you're vulnerable. So that's 7 yards. These 3 officers shot and killed this guy. Not to kill him, they used deadly force to stop the threat that happened to coincide with his death. That's the other element of use of force. You use the force to mitigate the threat, to stop the threat. When the threat isn't there anymore, you stop using the force, which means that if you shoot him and the knife isn't in his hand anymore, or if he's down and unable to move, you don't just then stand over the top of him and pig stick him in the back of the dome. No, the threat has been mitigated at that point. You do not continue applying deadly force. Same thing will go for pepper spray. You spray somebody because it's appropriate. Maybe they're being combative with you. They're trying to fight you. You spray them in the face. They go down. You don't continue spraying them in the face. You shoot to stop the threat. You spray to stop the threat. Whatever the tool is, it's to stop the threat. But if you read the Washington Post, they want the police to be social workers, to go there and say, he's a good guy. He clearly wants to write horror stories because he likes Iron Man. So he's entitled to stab me in the chest. They don't have all the puzzle pieces. They're refusing to assess what the actual circumstances were in this case, or the actual circumstances are in law enforcement in general, because this is the tragic story in a lot of cases for a lot of cops out there. And they're writing this piece in a way to paint the cops, who will forever be changed. They will never be the same. They've taken this guy's life, to paint them in a negative light, to paint law enforcement in general in a negative light. Because why? Because people who are out there actually trying to serve and protect the local populace, the people that put on a ballistic vest and a tool belt to go engage in violence if it is necessary so that they can protect their community against fraud and force, they need to be villainized because they should have known better and done better. Now, this is an example of media hoping that you do not actually do the reading and assessing and evaluating so that you can use emotion to insert in those missing puzzle pieces and come to the conclusion that they want you to, and that is that the cops were bad here. And they need to be held accountable. In fact, the family here, the Washington Post closes out, says, while the Maryland Attorney General's office investigates the shooting, Lamoury's family and advocates say that they want answers and accountability. What? You want these cops in jail? They did their job. I'm not saying they deserve a Medal of Valor. This is a tragic outgrowth of this incident. But I don't know what the expectation is, and the Washington Post is helping to shape that narrative and hope that the readers come to the same conclusion that they want, and that is that the cops are bad. All right, so we have got to the end here of the American Radicals podcast, but I do not want to leave you without a nice palate cleanse for the day, and we're talking about an incomplete picture. Saw this. It's about the Lion King, which, just out of curiosity, again, trying to gather the facts, it came out in 1994, 32 years ago. Thought you felt old now. Do you know that the Cuban Missile Crisis happened 32 years before The Lion King? So the Cuban Missile Crisis, the gap in time to the release of Lion King is equal to today and the Lion King. Actually, the moon landing was in 1969, so it was 25 years before. The moon landing is closer in proximity to the release of Lion King than Lion King is to right now on the American Radicals podcast. Gosh, we're old, guys. All right, but the classic, right? The way that that movie opens up. Do you actually know what they're saying in that? Found out a giant piece of the puzzle.
Nanzingonya bagiti baba.
You were way off.
Ingonyama.
What does it mean?
It means, look, there's a lion. Oh my God.
You're joking. That is not what that means. That is not what that means.
That's exactly what it means.
That's what it means. Look, there's a lion.
Oh my God. It's a
Look, there's a lion. Oh my God.
It's a lion.
Way less dramatic than I thought it was. All right, guys. Thank you again for joining us on the American Radicals podcast. We'll be back with you tomorrow, noontime, here on YouTube at AmRadPod, rumble.com/AmRadPod. And until then, have a great day.
You've been listening to the American Radicals podcast. Find us on YouTube, Rumble, and X at AmRadPod.